There are nights people remember because something loud happened. A fight, a siren, somebody throwing a glass across a room. Then there are nights people remember because nobody raised their voice at all. The first thing Madeline Rose said to Darren Cole was, "Sir, this is not really the kind of place people come to kill time." She said it with a little smile, the kind that looked polite from across the room, but felt like a slap when he was standing right in front of it. Darren looked at her for a second, then glanced past her at the warm gold lights hanging over the dining room, the white tablecloths, the polished wine glasses, the couples dressed like they'd all come from the same catalogue, and he said, "Well, that's good, because I came here to eat." Madeline did not laugh. She gave him another slow look, starting with his old brown work boots, moving up to his faded blue jeans, then stopping at the charcoal grey sweatshirt he had thrown on after a 12-hour drive. She had seen men like him before, or at least she thought she had. Guys who walked into nice places on a Friday night hoping the room would make them feel important. Guys who ordered one drink and took 100 pictures. Guys who got loud when the bill came. In her mind, Darren fit neatly into that little box before he had even said 10 words. The restaurant was called the Copper Finch, and it sat on the corner of Maple Street and 4th in a town called Belridge, Tennessee, the kind of town where old brick buildings had been turned into boutiques, coffee shops, wine bars, and restaurants with hand-painted menus that called mashed potatoes a root vegetable puree. 10 years earlier, the building had been an empty hardware warehouse with busted windows and pigeons living in the rafters. Now it was the most talked about restaurant in town, the place where couples came for anniversaries, local lawyers brought clients, and real estate agents took out-of-town buyers when they wanted them to believe Belridge was becoming something special. Darren had spent most of that afternoon 2 counties away at a new farm property the restaurant was considering buying from, walking through mud, shaking hands with a stubborn farmer named Lou Baines, checking fences, looking at a broken irrigation pump, and listening to Lou explain for 45 minutes why nobody under 60 knew how to grow a decent tomato anymore. By the time Darren drove back into town, he was tired, hungry, and in no mood to go home and heat up leftovers. He had not planned to come to the Copper Finch. That part mattered. He had not come in looking for trouble, and he had not come in to test anyone. He just wanted a quiet meal, something warm, something familiar, and maybe a booth where he could sit for an hour without being asked to solve a problem. He had been running businesses for so long that people forgot he liked to be left alone sometimes. The Copper Finch was one of those businesses, though almost nobody in the dining room knew that. Most people knew the face of the executive chef, knew the name of the general manager, knew the glossy articles about the restaurant's expansion plans, but Darren Cole kept himself out of the spotlight. He had built the place with his late brother Marcus, back when both of them were broke enough to argue over whether they could afford paint for the restaurant walls. Marcus had been the chef, Darren had been the man who found the money, fixed the plumbing, negotiated with vendors, and talked to anyone who would listen until the doors finally opened. After Marcus passed away 6 years earlier, Darren had stayed involved, but mostly behind the scenes. He liked it that way. His brother had always said a restaurant should not belong to the people who owned it. It should belong to the people who walk through the door. That line had stayed with Darren longer than most things did. Madeline, of course, had no idea who he was. She was 32, sharp-eyed, quick on her feet, and had been working at the Copper Finch for almost 3 years. She was good at her job when she wanted to be. She remembered birthdays, knew which customers liked their drinks dry, could carry 4 plates at once without looking down, and had a way of making wealthy guests feel like the restaurant had been built just for them. But somewhere along the way, she had started confusing good service with social sorting. She believed a certain kind of guest made the place better. She believed clothes told you what people were worth. She believed people like Darren were problems waiting to happen. Maybe it came from the way she had grown up, sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with her mother and younger brother, watching strangers make assumptions about them every time they showed up somewhere nice. Maybe it came from the fact that she had spent years trying to become someone nobody could dismiss. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe she had just gotten used to being the person who got to decide who belonged. Whatever the reason, when Darren stood at the host stand and asked for a table for one, she did not see a tired man looking for dinner. She saw an inconvenience wearing dusty boots. "We are pretty full tonight," she said, even though at least 6 tables near the windows were empty. Darren nodded and looked around. "I can wait." Madeline tapped a few things into the reservation screen, more for show than anything else. "I suppose we can find something," she said. "Follow me." She led him past the center of the dining room, past the quiet booths beneath the old exposed brick walls, past a family celebrating a college graduation, past a young couple leaning over a dessert menu, and past the table where Walter and Jean Pruitt were splitting a bottle of red wine. Walter had been a judge for most of his life, though he was retired now, and Jean had the kind of face that made people tell her things even when they had not planned to. Both of them noticed the way Madeline walks Darren past every decent table. Madeline kept moving until she reached a small two-top near the service corridor, close enough to the kitchen that the sound of plates clattering and cooks calling out orders came through every few minutes. It was not the worst table in the restaurant, but it was close. The lighting was dimmer there. The chair had a small wobble, and every time the swinging kitchen door opened, a wave of heat and garlic hit the table like somebody had opened an oven. Madeline pulled out the menu and laid it down in front of him. "This should work for you," she said. Darren looked at the table, then back at her. "You sure?" She tilted her head. "It is a quiet corner. Now, a man who wanted to make a scene could have done it right there. He could have asked for a manager, pointed at the empty booths, raised his voice so everybody could hear. Darren had done enough of that kind of thing in his younger years to know it almost never made people listen. Instead, he sat down slowly, steadied the wobbling chair with his foot, and said, "Quiet sounds good." That answer bothered Madeline more than it should have. She had wanted irritation. She had wanted him to push back so she could prove to herself that her first impression had been right. But he just thanked her, opened the menu, and started reading it as if nothing had happened. Walter Pruitt leaned a little closer to his wife and murmured, "That girl just seated him in the penalty box." Jean gave him a look over the rim of her wineglass. "Walter, it is the penalty box. You know exactly what you mean." "I do," he said quietly, and then his expression changed. "And I do not like it." Across the room, a young woman named Cara Lynn was having dinner with her fiancé, Ben. Cara taught high school history and had the bad habit of noticing everything. She had seen Madeline scan Darren from head to toe. She had watched her walk him past the empty tables. She had seen the tiny smile. "Did you see that?" Cara asked. Ben looked up from his phone. "See what?" She nodded toward Darren. "She is treating him like he came in carrying a raccoon under his jacket." Ben looked over, watched Darren settle into the table near the kitchen, then looked back at Cara. Maybe he asked for that table. Cara did not say anything for a moment. Then she gave him the kind of stare that made Ben put his phone face down. "No," she said, "he did not." Darren read the menu slowly. He had always liked watching how places describe themselves through food. The Copper Finch had changed a lot since Marcus was alive. Back then, the menu had been simple. Roast chicken, pork chops, cornbread, greens, whatever vegetables came in that week. Now there were phrases like smoked parsnip glaze and heritage grain risotto. Darren did not mind the changes. He liked ambition. But sometimes he missed the old days when the food did not have to explain itself so much. A server named Noah passed by with a water pitcher in his hand. Noah was 24, skinny, kind, and permanently worried that he was one wrong move away from getting fired. He had been working there less than 6 months and had already figured out that Madeline ran the floor like a small kingdom. She was not the manager, but she acted like she had been elected by God to keep chaos from entering through the front door. Noah slowed when he saw Darren sitting alone near the service corridor. "Can I get you some water, sir?" he asked. Darren smiled. "That would be great, thank you." Noah filled the glass. "Madeline will be right with you." Darren glanced toward the center of the room where Madeline was laughing with a couple in matching navy blazers. "I figured." Noah gave him a small, apologetic look, then hurried away before Madeline noticed him lingering. When she finally came back, it was not because she was ready to take Darren's order. It was because she had brought the wine list, even though he had not asked for it. She set it on the table and leaned one hand against the chair across from him. "Just so you know," she said, tapping the menu with one painted fingernail, "our entrees start at $38, and some of the chef specials are quite a bit more." Darren looked up. "Is that your way of recommending something?" Madeline smiled again, but this time the smile had teeth. "I just want to make sure there are no surprises later." For a second, the sounds of the restaurant seemed to pull back. The jazz music from the speaker above the bar, the clink of glasses, the low conversations, all of it kept going. But somehow the little space around that table got very still. Darren felt something old rise in his chest. Not anger exactly. It was a memory. He was 14 again, standing beside his mother at a department store, while a clerk followed them through the coat section. He was 21, in work clothes, being told a bank officer was too busy to see him. He was 35, sitting across from investors who assumed Marcus was the talent, and he was just the guy who carried boxes. He had spent a lifetime learning that people will tell you what they think of you long before they know anything real about you. The older he got, the less he cared about proving them wrong. He looked at the menu again and said, "Then I will take the braised short ribs." Madeline blinked. The short ribs were the most expensive entree on the menu that night, a slow-cooked dish with truffle potatoes, roasted carrots, and red wine yews. She'd expected him to order a side salad, maybe ask if the burger came with fries. "The short ribs," she repeated. "That is what I said. They are $62. Darren folded the menu and handed it to her. "Then I hope they are better than the ones I make at home." The corner of Noah's mouth twitched when he heard that from the service station, but he caught himself before he smiled. Madeline took the menu and walked away, her heels striking the floor harder than before. She went straight to Noah. "Table 12 ordered the short ribs," she said. "Make sure the kitchen knows he is not to complain when it takes a while." Noah looked at her. "It is a 40-minute ticket right now." "Exactly. Madeline, come on." She turned toward him. "What?" Noah lowered his voice. "He has not done anything." "You do not know that. Neither do you." That landed harder than Noah intended. Madeline stared at him for a moment, then gave a short laugh. "You are new here, Noah. You will learn." "Learn what?" "That not everybody who walks into this place belongs here." Noah watched her walk away, then looked toward Darren. Darren was sitting alone, hands folded near his water glass, watching the kitchen door swing open and closed. He did not look angry. He did not look embarrassed. That was the part that got under Madeline's skin. It was like he had seen this kind of thing before, like her little performance was not powerful enough to touch him. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Darren did not get bread. He did not get an update. He did not get the little welcome bite every other table received. Madeline made sure of that. Every time she passed him, she carried something to someone else. A cocktail for the table by the windows, extra napkins for the graduation party, a smile for the couple in navy blazers. Darren watched it all with the same calm expression, but inside, he was making notes. Not business notes exactly, human notes. The way Noah kept looking over like he wanted to help. The way Kara shifted in her chair every time Madeline ignored him. The way Walter Pruitt began to look less amused and more disappointed. Darren had always believed a restaurant showed its real character in the first 5 minutes after a problem began. You could train people to fold napkins. You could teach them how to pronounce Bordeaux. But you could not fake the instinct to make another human being feel small. That part came from somewhere deeper. At 27 minutes, Madeline passed his table, carrying a tray of appetizers, and said to a nearby server, loud enough for Darren to hear, "Some people think if they order the most expensive thing on the menu, nobody notices they do not know how to behave in a place like this." The server froze. Darren looked up at Madeline, not angry, not smiling either, just looking. She stopped for half a breath, maybe expecting him to say something. Then he picked up his water glass and took a sip. That was all. Madeline walked on, but the color in her face had changed. She had not won. She had only made the room notice. Walter set his wine glass down. "That is enough," he said under his breath. Jean touched his wrist. "Not yet. Why not? Because I think something is about to happen." Walter followed her eyes toward the far wall, where an old black and white photograph hung behind the bar. It showed the opening night of the Copper Finch 10 years earlier. There were smiling cooks, servers, Marcus Cole in his chef coat, a younger version of the general manager, and one tall man in a plain white shirt standing at the edge of the group, half turned away from the camera as if he had never wanted to be in it. Most people never looked at that picture closely, but Theo, the 19-year-old dishwasher who had been working there barely 3 weeks, did. He had studied it during orientation because the manager told him the story of the restaurant mattered. Theo stepped through the swinging kitchen door, carrying a stack of clean plates, glanced at Darren sitting alone near the service corridor, then looked at the photograph on the wall. The plates in his hands rattled softly, his eyes went wide, and in a voice barely louder than a breath, he whispered, "Oh no." Theo stood there with the stack of plates pressed against his chest, staring from Darren to the old photograph behind the bar, then back again. He was young enough to believe every thought needed to be spoken the second it entered his head, and before Noah could stop him, he leaned toward the service station and whispered, "That is Darren Cole." Noah looked at him. "Who?" Theo pointed toward the dining room with his chin. "That guy at table 12. That is Darren Cole. He owns this place." Noah turned slowly, his eyes settling on the man in the grey sweatshirt sitting near the kitchen corridor, then shifted to the photograph on the wall. He had seen it during training too, but he had never really paid attention to the tall man near the edge of the frame. Now that he looked, there was no mistaking it. The same broad shoulders, the same quiet posture, the same habit of resting one hand over the other when he was thinking. Noah felt his stomach drop. "Are you sure?" he asked. Theo nodded so fast the clean plates rattled again. "My uncle used to work construction here when they renovated. He said Darren Cole was the guy who kept the place alive when everybody else thought the project was dead. That is him. I swear it is him." Noah looked toward Madeline. She was at the bar, smiling at a group of out-of-town realtors who had already ordered 2 bottles of wine and were talking loudly about property values like they'd invented the idea of land. She had no clue what was happening behind her. She still thought table 12 was just some tired guy in work boots who had wandered into the wrong restaurant. Noah felt a strange mix of dread and satisfaction. Not because he wanted Madeline humiliated, but because he had spent the last hour watching her push someone around simply because she thought she could. He had been raised by a mother who cleaned offices at night, a woman who came home smelling like lemon cleaner and cold coffee, and he had seen people talk to her differently when she wore her work uniform. He knew that look. He knew the little pause people made before deciding whether you deserved patience. He did not like seeing it happen here. Not in a place that sold itself on hospitality. Not in a place that had Marcus Cole's name written on the back of the menu under a small paragraph about community and warmth. Theo grabbed Noah by the sleeve. "Should we tell Mr. Grady?" Mr. Grady was the general manager, a quiet man in his late 50s who had been with the Copperfinch since the first day. He had worked with Marcus and Darren from the beginning, and most of the staff respected him because he had the rare ability to make people feel guilty without raising his voice. Noah looked toward the office hallway, then back toward Darren. He hesitated. "Yeah," he said. "Go get him. Now." Theo disappeared through the kitchen door so fast he nearly ran into a line cook carrying a pan of roasted carrots. Noah stayed where he was for a moment, watching Darren sit alone at table 12. The short ribs were finally in the kitchen window, waiting to be picked up. They had been ready for almost 4 minutes. Madeline had walked by them twice, both times pretending she had not seen them. Noah knew that because he had seen her see them. He did not understand what she hoped to prove anymore. Maybe she did not either. Across the dining room, Cara Lynn was no longer pretending to enjoy her dinner. Her fork rested on the plate untouched, and she was watching Madeline with a look that could have cut glass. Ben had been trying to lighten the mood by telling her something about a broken air conditioner at his office, but he stopped when he realized she had not heard a word. "You are really mad about this," he said. Cara nodded. "Yeah? You do not even know that guy." "I do not have to know him." Ben looked down at his plate. "I know." Cara leaned back in her chair and folded her arms. "No, I do not think you do. That is the thing. People always wait until they know someone is important before they decide whether something is wrong. They wait to find out if the person has money or connections or a name they recognize. But if he was just some regular guy, if he was my dad after a day at work, would anybody care?" Ben looked toward Darren again, really looked at him this time, then shook his head. "You are right." Cara softened a little. "I know you did not mean anything by it." "I know," Ben said. "That somehow makes me feel worse." At the Pruitt's table, Walter had stopped drinking. He had spent 30 years in courtrooms watching people lie, explain, apologize, shift blame, and try to make themselves look better than they were. He knew the moment a person had crossed from carelessness into intent. In his mind, Madeline had crossed that line about 20 minutes ago. Jean had noticed the same thing, though she saw it differently. She did not think Madeline was cruel in the simple way. She thought Madeline was scared of being seen as small, and somewhere along the line she had learned that the easiest way to avoid feeling small was to make someone else feel smaller first. Jean had known people like that her whole life. Sometimes they changed. Sometimes they did not. "What do you think he is going to do?" Walter asked quietly. Jean glanced at Darren. I do not think he knows yet. Walter raised an eyebrow. He owns the restaurant. That does not mean he came in here looking to make a point. Maybe not, Walter said. But he has one now. Near the bar, Madeline had started feeling restless. It was not guilt, not yet. It was irritation, the kind that builds when a person refuses to play the role you assign them. Darren was supposed to be embarrassed. He was supposed to look around nervously, maybe ask about prices, maybe complain about the wait, maybe make some excuse and leave before the check came. Instead, he sat there like none of it mattered. He had barely touched his water, but he had not asked for another refill. He had not raised his hand. He had not complained to Noah. He had not even looked angry when she made that remark about people not knowing how to behave in a place like this. That silence was starting to feel less like weakness and more like judgment. Madeline hated that. She was used to reading people quickly. It was part of what made her good at her job. She could spot the anniversary couple that wanted a little extra attention, the businessman who wanted to impress someone, the mother who needed help keeping her kids calm, the rich customer who would leave a huge tip if you laughed at his stories. But Darren had nothing for her to read. No bragging, no insecurity, no performance. He sat in that terrible table by the kitchen like he had chosen it, like the whole room belonged to him. The thought came to her before she could stop it, and she almost laughed at herself. Belonged to him. Sure, maybe he owned the building too. She looked over at him again, then noticed Noah standing near the service station, staring in her direction. "What?" she called. Noah looked away immediately. "Nothing." Madeline narrowed her eyes. "Then pick up table 12's food. It has been sitting there." Noah did not move. "I thought you were serving that table." "I am busy." "You have been busy for 30 minutes." She walked toward him, her smile gone now. "Do you have something you want to say?" Noah swallowed. He had always hated confrontation. His voice got tight whenever someone pushed him into it. But something in him had shifted when Theo recognized Darren, and something else had shifted long before that. Maybe the first time he watched his mother get treated like invisible furniture by a man in a suit. "Yeah," he said. "I think you should just bring him his food and stop making this worse." Madeline stared at him. "Excuse me, he is a customer. Do not lecture me about customers. I am not. I'm saying you are treating him badly." Her eyes hardened. "You have been here 6 months, Noah. That does not make me blind." For a second, the entire service station went quiet. A bartender polishing a glass stopped mid-motion. One of the cooks leaned through the kitchen door to see what was happening. Madeline stepped closer to Noah, lowering her voice. "You want to keep this job. You might want to remember who runs this floor." Noah looked at her, nervous but steady. "You do not run the floor, Madeline. You just act like you own it." The words hung there. Madeline's face went pale, then red. She opened her mouth to answer, but before she could, the kitchen door swung open again. Mr. Grady stepped out with Theo behind him. Mr. Grady had no reason to move quickly anymore. He had spent enough years in restaurants to know that rushing usually made people panic. But tonight, he was moving with purpose. He wore his usual dark vest, white shirt, and reading glasses tucked into his front pocket. The lines around his eyes were deeper than usual. Theo came out behind him looking like he had personally discovered a tornado approaching the building. "Mr. Beaumont." Grady walked past Madeline without saying a word and headed straight toward table 12. That was when the room began to notice. Conversations softened. Forks slowed. Kara sat up in her chair. Walter Pruitt placed both hands on the table. Even the realtors at the bar turned to watch. Madeline looked from Mr. Grady to Darren, then back again. Something cold moved through her chest. She had seen Mr. Grady greet VIP guests before. She had seen him walk over to congratulate people celebrating big events. But this was different. His shoulders were stiff, his face was serious, and he was walking toward that man like he was approaching someone he had known for years. Darren heard the footsteps before he looked up. When he saw Mr. Grady, he smiled a little. "Earl," he said. Mr. Grady stopped beside the table, and for just a moment the manager's professional mask slipped. He looked relieved, worried, and embarrassed all at once. "Darren," he said quietly, "I did not know you were coming in tonight." Darren nodded. That was sort of the point. Mr. Grady glanced at the untouched water glass, the empty bread plate, the service corridor behind him. then toward the kitchen window where the short ribs had been sitting under the heat lamp. He did not need a full explanation. He had been in the business too long not to read a room. "Have you been waiting long?" Darren looked at his watch. "Long enough to learn a few things." Mr. Grady closed his eyes for half a second, then opened them again. "I am sorry." Darren did not answer right away. He looked around the room, at the diners pretending not to listen, at Noah standing by the service station, at Theo hovering near the kitchen door, and finally at Madeline, who was standing frozen beside the bar with one hand wrapped around the edge of a tray. "I know you are," Darren said. That was all. No yelling, no scene. Somehow it was worse. Mr. Grady turned toward the kitchen. "Noah, bring the short ribs out, please." Noah nodded immediately and hurried to the window. Madeline took one step forward. "Mr. Grady, I can handle table 12. Mr. Grady looked at her. It was not a loud look. It was not dramatic, but it stopped her cold. "No," he said. "You cannot." The words were quiet, but everyone heard them. The realtors at the bar went silent. Kara's fingers tightened around her glass. Walter exhaled slowly through his nose. Madeline looked around and realized the entire room was watching her now, not Darren. For the first time all night, she felt what it was like to be measured by strangers. Her face flushed. "I did not know who he was," she said. Mr. Grady's expression did not change. "That is not the problem." Madeline looked at Darren. He was still sitting there, calm, tired, almost sad. Not smug, not triumphant. That made it harder. If he had been angry, she could have hated him for it. If he had laughed, she could have called him arrogant. But he just looked disappointed. And somehow that disappointment felt heavier than any insult. "I thought he was," she began, then stopped. Darren leaned back in his chair. "What did you think I was?" Madeline swallowed. She had a dozen answers, none of them safe. A man who could not afford to be there. A man who would cause trouble. A man who did not belong. A man like the ones she had spent years trying not to become. She looked down at the floor. "I thought you were not serious about eating here." Darren gave a small nod. "And how did you decide that?" She glanced at his clothes. He followed her eyes and looked down at his own boots. Mud had dried along the sides. His jeans were wrinkled at the knees. The sweatshirt had a faded stain near one sleeve from where he had leaned against a truck bed that afternoon. "Because of how I looked," she said quietly. Darren nodded again. "At least that part is honest." The short ribs arrived. Noah placed the plate in front of Darren with both hands, like he was setting down something fragile. The dish looked beautiful, and Darren barely glanced at it. Mr. Munting." Grady stood beside the table, waiting. Madeline stood near the bar, wishing somebody would tell her where to put her hands. She suddenly felt too visible. Every word she had said earlier came back in pieces. "This should work for you, just so there are no surprises later. Some people do not know how to behave in a place like this." She had said those things because she thought nobody important would care. That was the ugly truth of it. She had not been trying to protect the restaurant. She had been trying to protect herself from the kind of person she had decided Darren was. But now she had to look at him and admit that she had not just judged his clothes, she had judged his worth. Darren picked up his fork, then set it down again. "You know," he said, still looking at Madeline. "My brother and I opened this place because we got tired of being treated like we were asking for favors whenever we walked into a room like this." Mr. Grady lowered his eyes. He had heard this story before. Darren continued, his voice even. "Marcus was a cook, a great one. But people looked at him and saw a guy with tattoos and the bad knee who smelled like onions after work. They did not see the talent. They did not see the way he could feed 50 people with whatever was left in the pantry. They did not see the fact that he spent every Sunday making meals for folks who could not afford them. They saw what they wanted to see." Madeline stayed quiet. Darren looked at the old photograph behind the bar. "When we opened the Copper Finch, he told me one thing. He said, if somebody walks in hungry, tired, broke, dressed up, dressed down, famous, unknown, whatever, they should feel like they have a seat here. That was the whole point." He looked back at her. Tonight, that did not happen. The room was silent now. Even the kitchen seemed quieter. Madeline blinked hard. She had expected anger. She had expected a lecture about customer service. She had not expected grief. She had not expected the restaurant to mean something deeper than polished glassware and expensive wine. Mr. Grady finally spoke. "Darren, I should have caught this sooner." Darren shook his head. "You were running a restaurant. That is what managers do. You cannot stand next to every table." Then he looked toward the other diners, but a lot of people saw it. That line moved through the room like a draft under a door. Kara looked down. Ben shifted beside her. Walter leaned back in his chair. Jean closed her eyes for a moment. Darren was not blaming them exactly, but he was not letting them disappear either. Kara stood up first. She did not make a big show of it. Kara stood up first. She did not make a big show of it. She simply walked over to Darren's table, her face serious. "I am sorry," she said. "I saw what was happening, and I kept waiting for someone else to say something." Darren looked up at her. "You do not owe me an apology." "Maybe not," Kara said, "but I owe myself one." Ben stood too, coming over beside her. "She tried to tell me something was wrong, and I brushed it off," he said. "That was on me." Darren gave them both a small, tired smile. "Then next time, do better." Walter Pruitt rose from his seat next. He moved slowly, one hand resting on the back of his chair. "Mr. Cole," he said, "I spent most of my career telling people that silence can be a decision. I suppose I forgot that when I was sitting here with a glass of wine." Darren nodded. "We all forget sometimes." Walter looked at Madeline, then at Mr. Grady, but forgetting does not mean there should be no consequence. Madeline's head lifted slightly. There it was, the word she had been waiting for. Consequence. She knew what everybody expected next. She knew what would make sense from a business standpoint. The owner had been insulted in front of customers. The staff had watched. The restaurant's reputation could be damaged. She should be fired. Part of her almost wanted it to happen quickly, just to get the humiliation over with. But Darren did not look at Mr. Grady. He looked at her. "Madeline," he said. Her throat tightened. "Yes." "Why did you do it?" She stared at him. The question was almost worse than asking for an apology. "Why did you do it?" Not "what did you do it?" Not "what did you do?" Not "how could you?" Why? She wanted to say she had been tired. She wanted to say the restaurant was busy. She wanted to say she had dealt with rude customers all week. All of that was true, but none of it was the reason. The reason was uglier. It lived under the surface. She looked at the polished floor, then at Darren's boots, then finally at his face. "Because I thought if I could tell who belonged here, then maybe I belonged here too." Nobody spoke. Madeline let out a shaky breath. "I grew up in a place where people looked at us and decided everything before my mom even opened her mouth. I hated it. I hated feeling like I had to prove I deserved basic respect. Then I got this job, and I started thinking I had finally made it somewhere. I started thinking I had finally made it somewhere. I started thinking I had to protect that. I thought if I let in the wrong kind of people, then people would look at me like I was still from the wrong kind of place." She gave a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. "And now I sound exactly like the people I used to hate." Darren watched her for a long moment. His face softened, but not enough to let her off the hook. "Pain explains things," he said. "It does not excuse them." Madeline nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. "I know." "Do you?" Darren asked. It was not cruel. It was honest. Madeline closed her eyes. It was honest. Madeline closed her eyes. "I am starting to." Mr. Grady took a step forward. "Madeline, you need to go home for the night." She looked at him. "Am I fired?" Mr. Grady glanced at Darren, then back at her. "That decision will not be made in the middle of the dining room." Madeline nodded. She set her tray down on the bar. Her hands were shaking. She turned as if she was going to leave, but Darren stopped her. "Madeline," she looked back. "Do not leave thinking this is about me owning the place." His voice was calm, but it carried across the room. It would have been just as wrong if I was a truck driver, a janitor, a tourist, somebody who saved up for 6 months to bring their wife here, or someone who walked in with $20 in their pocket hoping they could find something on the menu. You understand that? Madeline nodded again, this time with tears running down her face. "Yes." Darren picked up his fork. "Good, because the person you should be ashamed of hurting is not me. It is the person you did not think mattered." Madeline stood there for another second, then walked toward the office hallway. Nobody watched her go with satisfaction. That surprised her. She'd expected whispers, smirks, maybe even someone clapping. But the room was quiet, not forgiving exactly, not yet. Just quiet in the way a room gets when everyone has been forced to see something uncomfortable about themselves. Darren finally took a bite of the short ribs. He chewed slowly, then looked at Mr. Grady. "They are good." Mr. Grady gave the faintest smile. "Marcus's recipe." Darren nodded. Mr. Grady gave the faintest smile. "Marcus's recipe." "I know." The tension broke just enough for a few people to breathe again. Noah looked relieved. Theo looked like he might pass out from excitement. Kara returned to her table, but before she sat down, she looked toward Darren and said, "For what it is worth, you handled that better than I would have." Darren smiled. "That is why I waited." Kara frowned slightly. Waited for what? Darren looked around the room, at the staff, at Mr. Grady, at the empty booths by the window, at the old photograph behind the bar. For everyone to show me who they were when they thought nobody important was watching. Then he looked at Mr. Grady and added, "After closing, I want the whole team here, not just Madeline. Everyone. Mr. Madeline. Everyone." Grady nodded slowly. "Understood." Darren took another bite, and for the first time all evening, he let himself relax into the chair. But behind the office hallway door, Madeline sat alone on a folding chair, staring at her hands, while the sounds of the restaurant continued on without her. She had spent years believing respect was something you earned by becoming untouchable. Tonight, she was beginning to understand that real respect might start with the exact opposite, with seeing people clearly before they had a chance to prove anything at all. The dining room never really went back to normal after that, not that night anyway. People kept eating, because that is what people do when they are caught in an uncomfortable moment in public. They pick up their forks, take small bites, pretend to read menus they already memorized, but the air had changed. The copper Finch still had candlelight on every table, still had soft jazz spilling out from the speakers, still had waiters carrying plates through the room, but the polish was gone for a while. You could see the machinery underneath. You could see the people. Darren finished his short ribs slowly, not because he was trying to make a point anymore, but because he had been hungry when he walked in, and despite everything, Marcus's recipe still tasted like home. The red wine sauce was rich without being too sweet. The potatoes had that little bit of black pepper Marcus always insisted on, and for a few minutes Darren let himself remember the old kitchen they had started in, the one with cracked tile floors, a leaking freezer door, and a stove that only worked if you kicked the bottom corner twice. Marcus had loved feeding people. He had loved the look on somebody's face when they tasted something that made them feel cared for, even if only for 10 minutes. That was why the whole thing with Madeline had gotten under Darren's skin in a way he had not expected. It was not about being insulted. He had been insulted before. He had been underestimated more times than he could count. It was about sitting in the restaurant his brother had dreamed about and watching someone use it as a weapon against a stranger. Mr. Weapon. Grady stayed close by until Darren finished, checking on tables, speaking to staff in low voices, making sure nobody turned the rest of the evening into gossip. Noah carried Darren's empty plate back to the kitchen, and Theo followed him like a kid following a parade float. "You think he is mad?" Theo whispered. Noah looked down at the plate. "I think he is disappointed." Theo frowned. "Is that worse?" Noah gave him a tired smile. "Usually." At the table near the windows, Kara and Ben had gone quiet too. Their dinner had cooled, their conversation had shifted, and neither of them knew quite how to return to talking about weekend plans or wedding venues after watching a woman unravel in front of an entire room. Ben kept rubbing the edge of his napkin between his fingers. "I keep thinking about what he said," he told Kara, "about people showing you who they are when they think nobody important is watching." Kara nodded. "Yeah." Ben glanced toward the office hallway where Madeline had disappeared. "That can be scary." "It can," Kara said. Then she looked at him, not angry now, just honest. "But it can also be useful. You find out where you need to do better." Walter Pruitt and Jean finished their wine in silence. Walter had made a career out of deciding what consequences fit what actions, and he knew there was no simple answer waiting behind the office door. Madeline had been cruel. There was no point pretending otherwise. She had embarrassed a guest, ignored him, mocked him, and used her little bit of power like it was a badge. But Walter had also seen people lose everything over one bad night and learn absolutely nothing from it. He had seen punishment become performance, a way for everyone else to feel clean without changing a thing about themselves. Jean seemed to know what he was thinking, because when he reached for the check, she placed her hand over his. "Do not turn tonight into a verdict before you know the whole story," she said. Walter looked at her. "I was a judge for 30 years. John smiled. "Exactly why I am reminding you." By the time the last few tables paid their bills, the night had settled into that strange restaurant quiet that comes after closing, when the doors are locked, the lights are lowered, and every surface suddenly looks more tired than it did an hour earlier. Chairs were turned upside down on tables near the front windows. The bar staff counted bottles and wiped down counters. In the kitchen, someone ran the dishwasher, and the steady rush of water filled the back half of the building like rain. Nobody had been told to leave yet, but nobody was going home either. The whole staff understood that Mr. Grady wanted them in the dining room at the end of the night. Madeline sat alone in the office behind the kitchen, staring at a framed menu from the restaurant's opening year. It hung on the wall beside an old photo of Marcus and Darren standing outside the unfinished building, both of them younger, both of them exhausted, both of them smiling like they had somehow gotten away with something. The menu was simple: fried chicken, catfish, cornbread, braised greens, peach cobbler. No truffle foam, no imported salt, no little descriptions trying to convince people dinner was a spiritual experience. At the bottom of the menu, in faded ink, were the words Marcus had written himself: "Good food, good people, everybody welcome." Madeline had walked past that sentence hundreds of times. She had never really read it. Now she could not stop looking at it. Her phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from her mother. "You still coming by tomorrow?" "I made too much chili again." Madeline stared at the screen for a long time before typing back, "Yeah, I will be there." Then she deleted it. Then she deleted it. Then she typed, "I need to talk to you about something." Her mother replied almost immediately, "You okay?" Madeline wanted to say yes. She wanted to say she had a bad shift, that a customer complained, that her boss was upset, that it was complicated. But none of that felt honest anymore. So she wrote, "No, not really." Her mother did not ask for details. She just sent back, "Come over when you can. We will talk." That simple message nearly broke her. A few minutes later, Mr. Grady opened the office door. He did not come all the way in. He leaned against the frame, his hands folded in front of him. "They are ready," he said. Madeline looked up. Her makeup had smudged under her eyes, and she had taken off the little gold earrings she always wore at work because they suddenly felt too bright, too polished, too ridiculous. "Am I getting fired?" she asked. Mr. Grady stood there quietly for a moment. "I do not know yet," he said. Madeline let out a bitter laugh. "That is not exactly comforting. It is not supposed to be comforting." She looked down again. Mr. Grady's voice softened, but only a little. "You made choices tonight, Madeline. Real choices. You do not get to turn them into an accident because you feel bad now." She nodded. "I know, but we are not going to decide your future in the middle of a public humiliation either. That would not be fair, and I am not interested in being unfair just because you were." Madeline looked at him, surprised. Mr. Grady continued, "You will be placed on suspension while we review everything. You will not be on the floor. You will not contact any staff about this. You will not post about it. You will go home tonight and think about whether you are sorry because you got caught, or sorry because you finally understand what you did." Madeline's throat tightened. "And if I do understand," Mr. Grady gave a small sigh, "then tomorrow will be the first day you prove it." The dining room looked different when Madeline walked back into it. Without customers, it felt larger. The tables were bare now, candles burned low, and the great chandelier above the center of the room reflected in the dark windows like a floating city. The entire staff stood in a loose circle near the bar. Noah was there, hands tucked into his apron pockets. Theo stood beside him, trying very hard not to look terrified. The bartenders were there. The cooks came out from the kitchen, still in stained chef coats. The hostess, the busser, the dishwasher, the prep cook, all of them. Darren stood near the old black and white photograph behind the bar, his jacket folded over one arm. He did not stand like a boss giving a speech. He stood like a man who had been carrying something heavy all night and was not sure where to set it down. When Madeline entered, everyone looked at her for a second, then looked away. That somehow felt worse than staring. Darren waited until the room settled. Then he looked around at all of them and said, "I did not ask you to stay because I wanted to embarrass anyone." His voice was low, steady, almost tired. "I asked you to stay because I do not think tonight happened because one person woke up and decided to be cruel. I think it happened because something in this place got off track, and the rest of us either missed it, ignored it, or let it become normal." Nobody moved. Darren glanced toward the kitchen door. "When Marcus and I opened this place, we had no business opening a restaurant. We had no money, no investors who believed in us, and no clue how many things could go wrong in a single day." A few older employees smiled faintly. Mr. Grady looked down at the floor, remembering. Darren continued, "The first week we were open, a man came in during a storm. He had a wet jacket, work gloves hanging out of his back pocket, and mud halfway up his boots. He stood at the door for a minute because he thought he could not afford anything on the menu. Marcus walked over, sat him down, brought him a bowl of soup and cornbread, and told him he could pay whatever he had. The guy gave us $4 and apologized for not having more." Darren paused. The dishwasher stopped moving. Even the kitchen felt still. That man came back every Friday for almost 2 years, not because of the soup, because Marcus made him feel like he was not a problem somebody had to tolerate. That is the kind of place this was supposed to be. That is the kind of place it still has to be. He looked at Madeline then, but he did not stay on her for long. His eyes moved around the room. What happened tonight did not only involve Madeline. Noah saw it. Theo saw it. Some of you saw it. Mr. Grady saw it. Mr. Grady saw it too late. Customers saw it. I saw it. So before we talk about what happens next, I want to know something. What should this place do when somebody is being treated like they do not belong? For a few seconds, nobody answered. Then Noah cleared his throat. His face was pale, but he stepped forward anyway. "We should say something," he said. "Right then, not later, not after it gets worse." Darren nodded. "Why did you not?" Noah looked embarrassed. "Because I was scared she would make my job harder, and because I told myself it was not my table." Darren let that sit for a moment. "That is honest," Noah swallowed. "It is not good, but it is honest." "Honesty is where you start," Darren said. Theo raised his hand halfway, then seemed to realize this was not school and lowered it. "I did not say anything either," he admitted. "I only said something when I figured out who you were." Darren looked at him. "Why?" Theo stared at the floor. "Because I thought it mattered more when I knew you were the owner." Darren nodded slowly. "That is a hard thing to admit." Theo looked up. "Yeah, but it is important." Theo looked up. "Yeah, but it is important, because it should not have mattered who I was." Theo nodded. "I know that now." A cook named Celia crossed her arms over her chest. She had been with the Copperfinch for 4 years and had a reputation for being blunt enough to scare delivery drivers. "I saw Madeline do this before," she said. Madeline looked at her. Celia met her eyes. "Not this bad, maybe. But I saw her decide who got the good tables, who got extra attention, who got the smile. She did it with people she thought would not complain. And I never said anything because I stay in the kitchen and told myself the floor was not my business." Madeline's face tightened. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that it was not always like that she worked hard, that she was good with people who treated her well. But the words would not come, because Celia was right. There had been little moments. A tired mother with 3 loud children who got seated slower because Madeline assumed they would not tip. An older couple in plain clothes she gave the least desirable booth. A delivery driver who came in to pick up food and got ignored for 10 minutes because he did not look like a customer worth impressing. None of it had felt important at the time. That was the problem. Darren leaned one hand against the bar. "This is how culture gets built," he said. "Not in big speeches. In little moments. In who gets greeted first. In who gets the good table. In whether we bother to look someone in the eye. You can have the best food in town, but if people walk out feeling smaller than when they walked in, then we failed." Mr. Grady stepped forward. "Starting tomorrow, we are changing a few things. Service concerns can be reported to any manager, not just your direct supervisor. Any employee who sees a guest being ignored or mocked has the authority to step in and get help. We are reviewing table assignments and service standards. And we are bringing in outside training, not because we need a corporate slideshow, but because we need to understand what bias looks like when it is quiet and familiar." A few staff members nodded. Darren looked around the room once more. And once a month, this restaurant is going to host an open community dinner. No dress code, no reservations, no pressure to order a bottle of wine to justify your seat. We will serve a simple menu, and anyone who comes through the door will be treated like they belong here. Because they do. Theo's eyes widened. Noah looked at Darren with something close to relief. Celia gave one firm nod. Mr. Grady's expression changed too. For the first time that night, he looked like he could see a way forward. Madeline stood at the edge of the circle, listening to all of it, and she felt the weight of what she had almost destroyed. Not the restaurant. The restaurant would survive. It had survived storms, debt, staff turnover, a kitchen fire, and the year everyone thought no one would ever go out to eat again. What she had almost destroyed was the idea that this place stood for something better than the rest of the world. Darren finally turned toward her. "Madeline," he said. She looked up. "You owe people an apology, not just me." Her eyes filled again. "I know. You owe Noah an apology for putting him in a position where doing the right thing felt dangerous. You owe the staff an apology for making your bias their problem. And you owe yourself an apology too, because somewhere along the way you became the kind of person you said you never wanted to be." Madeline nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I am sorry," she said, looking first at Noah. "I am sorry I made you feel like speaking up would cost you your job. That was wrong." Noah looked at her for a moment, then nodded slowly. She turned to Celia. "I am sorry I acted like the floor belonged to me. It did not." Then she looked around the room. "I spent so much time trying to make sure nobody looked down on me that I started looking down on people first. I do not have an excuse for that. I was scared, and I was proud, and I hurt people because of it." Her voice cracked, but she kept going. "I do not know if I deserve another chance here. I know saying sorry does not fix what I did, but I am not going to pretend I did not understand the lesson just because it hurts." Darren watched her quietly. Then he said, "You do not get to decide your consequence. That is not how accountability works. Mr. Grady will make the employment decision after reviewing tonight and your record. But you do get to decide what kind of person walks out of here next." Madeline wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I want to be better." Darren nodded once. "Then do the work when nobody is applauding." The meeting ended without applause, without some big dramatic hug, without everyone suddenly becoming best friends because a few tears had been shed. That would have been too easy. People drifted back to their closing work in silence. Noah went to stack menus. Theo carried clean glassware to the bar. Celia disappeared into the kitchen where there were still pans to scrub and prep lists to finish. Mr. Grady spoke quietly with Darren near the office. Madeline stood by the empty host stand for a moment, running her fingers along the polished wood. She remembered how powerful she had felt there a few hours earlier, standing behind it like she controlled who entered and who did not. Now it looked like what had always been, a piece of furniture near a door. Nothing more. When she finally left, the night air felt colder than she expected. Belridge had gone quiet. The coffee shop across the street was dark. The boutique windows were lit only by security lights, and the old brick sidewalks shone from a little rain that had started while she was inside. Madeline walked 3 blocks before she realized she had been holding her breath. Her car was parked behind the restaurant, but she did not go to it right away. She stood under the awning of a closed bookstore and looked back at the copper finch. Through the front windows, she could see Darren still inside, standing under the chandelier with Mr. Grady. From the sidewalk, he did not look powerful. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had come in hungry and stayed late because something mattered to him. Madeline thought about how easily the night could have gone differently. If Darren had been anyone else, would she have kept pushing? Would he have left humiliated, paid a bill he could barely afford, and told himself never to come back? The answer came too quickly. Yes, and that answer was worse than losing her job. The next morning, Madeline drove to her mother's apartment before noon. Her mother opened the door in an old t-shirt and slippers, holding a wooden spoon in one hand. The smell of chili filled the hallway. She took one look at Madeline's face and did not ask questions right away. She just pulled her inside, shut the door and said, "Sit down." Madeline sat at the small kitchen table she had grown up eating cereal at. For a while, she could not say anything. Then she told her mother everything, not the cleaned-up version, not the version where she was misunderstood. The real version. Her mother listened without interrupting, stirring the chili every now and then, nodding once or twice, but mostly letting Madeline hear her own words out loud. When she finished, the kitchen was quiet. Madeline wiped her eyes and said, "I think I ruined everything." Her mother set the spoon down. "Maybe you ruined something," she said. "But you are not allowed to turn one bad thing into your whole identity just because it is easier than fixing it." Madeline looked up. Her mother pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "You know what hurts me most?" she asked. Madeline shook her head. "It is not that you got caught. It is that you knew how it felt when people judged us, and you used that pain to make yourself feel bigger than somebody else." Madeline lowered her eyes. Her mother reached across the table and took her hand. "But you came here and told me the truth. That means you are not done yet. Now you have to decide whether you are going to be embarrassed for a week or changed for the rest of your life." 2 weeks passed before Madeline heard from Mr. Grady again. The suspension had been difficult in ways she had not expected. At first, she was angry. Angry at Darren for exposing her. Angry at Noah for speaking up. Angry at the customers for watching. Angry at herself for being careless enough to get caught. But after a few days, the anger started to burn out, and what was left was harder to live with. She began noticing the same kind of behavior everywhere. A clerk ignoring an older man at a grocery store because he moved too slowly. A woman at a coffee shop sighing when someone paid with coins. A customer snapping at a cashier who looked barely old enough to drive. None of it was exactly like what she had done, but all of it came from the same ugly place, that belief that some people deserve patience and others should be grateful just to be tolerated. She started volunteering twice a week at a community pantry on the east side of town, not because anyone told her to, but because she needed to be around people without deciding what they were worth before they spoke. She stocked canned beans, carried boxes, cleaned folding tables, and learned names. Mr. Alvarez, who always asked for extra tea bags because his wife liked them. Tasha, who works 2 jobs and still laughed louder than anyone in the room. A quiet man named Leonard, who came in every Thursday wearing the same old work jacket and always said thank you even when he was embarrassed to be there. Madeline did not tell them where she worked. She did not tell them what happened. She just listened. When Mr. called them what happened, she just listened. Grady finally called. His voice was careful. "We reviewed the incident," he said. "We also reviewed past concerns. You are not being fired." Madeline closed her eyes. Relief hit first, then shame for feeling relief. Mr. Grady continued, "But you are not returning to the floor as if nothing happened. You will come back on a final performance agreement. You will work limited shifts under supervision. You will attend the training we are bringing in, and you will help organize the first community dinner. This is not a reward. It is a chance to prove you understand what service actually means." Madeline swallowed. "I do. You have not proven it yet," Mr. Grady said, "but you can." The first community dinner took place on a Tuesday night in late October. The weather had turned cool, and the sidewalks outside the Copper Finch were covered with brown leaves that stuck to people's shoes. The restaurant looked different without the usual reservation list and expensive wine displays. The front doors were open early. A handwritten sign in the window said, "Come in, sit down, you are welcome here." The menu was simple, just like the old one hanging in the office. Chicken and dumplings, greens, cornbread, peach cobbler, coffee. No dress code, no questions. Pay what you can, if you can, if you can. Darren arrived just before 6, not in work boots this time, but in a clean flannel shirt and dark jeans. He stood across the street for a minute before going inside. He did not want anyone making a show of him. He just wanted to see what the room felt like. Through the front window, he saw Madeline at the host stand. For a second, she looked exactly like she had on that first night. Her hair was pulled back. Her uniform was neat. Her shoulders were straight. But then the door opened, and an older man stepped inside with rain on his jacket and paint stains on both hands. He hesitated at the entrance, scanning the room as if he had already decided he might be in the wrong place. Madeline saw him. Darren watched her take one breath, and she smiled. Not the polished smile she used to wear for customers she thought mattered, but something quieter and real. "Hey," she said. "Glad you made it in before the rain got worse. Table for one." The man looked surprised. "I just wanted to see if I could grab a plate." Madeline stepped around the host stand and picked up a menu. "You can do better than grab a plate. Come on, I have a good table for you." She led him past the service corridor, past the dim corner, past the table where Darren had sat. She brought him to a booth near the window, where the light was warm and the room looked out onto Maple Street. The man sat down slowly. "You sure this is okay?" he asked. Madeline placed the menu in front of him. "I am sure," she said. "You belong here." Darren stood outside for another moment, looking through the glass. Mr. Grady came up beside him, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You going in?" he asked. Darren looked at Madeline as she helped an elderly woman take off her coat, then waved Theo over to bring extra cornbread to a family with 3 kids. "Yeah," Darren said. "I think I am." They walked inside together. Madeline noticed Darren near the door and froze for half a second. Her face changed. Not fear, exactly. Not the way it had the first night. This time it was something closer to understanding. She walked over to him. "Mr. Cole," she said. Darren gave her a look. "Darren is fine." She nodded. "Darren is fine." She nodded. "Darren." There was a pause. "Thank you," she said. Darren looked around at the full room, at the kids laughing over cobbler, at the tired workers eating warm food, at the tables that had no reason to exist except that someone had decided everyone deserved one. "Do not thank me yet," he said. "Just keep doing it when I am not here." Madeline smiled a little. "That is the plan." Darren nodded toward the dining room. "Then you are doing better than most people." He took the coffee from Mr. Grady, walked toward the bar, and stopped beneath the old black-and-white photograph of Marcus. For the first time in a long while, the copper finch felt like the place his brother had wanted it to be. Not perfect, not perfect, not polished, not free from mistakes, but open, human. A place where people could walk in tired, muddy, underdressed, overdressed, broke, successful, angry, nervous, lonely, or just hungry, and nobody at the door got to decide whether they deserved a seat. And still, even after everything, the question stayed with Darren. Should Madeline have been fired that night? Some people would say yes, and maybe they would have a point. She hurt someone because she thought he was powerless. She only faced the truth after she learned he was not. Was that kind of behavior something a second chance could really fix, or was she only sorry because she got caught? Others would say people cannot learn anything if we throw them away the moment they fail. Maybe real accountability is not just punishment. Maybe it is the harder work of changing after the room goes quiet and nobody is watching anymore. So what do you think? Did Darren do the right thing by giving Madeline a chance to earn back trust, or should the copper finch have let her go the moment she showed who she really was? Drop your honest opinion in the comments, because this is one of those stories where the answer might say as much about us as it does about her. And if this story made you think about the way people are treated in everyday places, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more stories about pride, justice, second chances, and the moments that reveal who people really are.